That idea of self-care is no longer sustainable.
Grind culture, productivity based,
We are at the breaking point.
get it done at all costs.
We're moving away from this success-based focus
Trying to implement this self-care ideology.
and instead,
Don't burn yourself out.
this idea of finding meaning. Hi there, I'm Reverend Ryan, and we are Soul Evolution Collaborative, a nonprofit based in universal spiritual principles, offering possibilities for navigating the evolution of life in an authentic and intentional way. And this is Truth Be Told 2.0, a weekly series that is changing the norms, bringing you inspiring and uplifting messages, and maybe a way to look at life a little bit differently. So, today we're going to talk about the evolution of self care, how it started, how it's going, and all the things in between. And I think this conversation is kind of at the pivotal moment in history. I believe that we have been realizing more oftentimes than not the importance of self care and how if we can't take care of ourselves, then it's really hard to do anything else, to love others, to serve others, to kind of move and navigate this world. And so this week, and this month rather, we're going to be talking about self care, the importance of it, maybe a few little tidbits on how to do it, and also the impact of this, what I would call sacred practice. And so, come along for the ride, sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told 2.0.
The term self-care can bring up a lot of different thoughts and feelings. Often it renders visions of like pampering massages and candlelit bubble baths, but it wasn't always that way. So let's take a look at how it all started. Self-care initially came from the medical industry in the 1950s as part of this shift towards patient-centered care. However, the biggest proponents of self-care were the Black Panthers beginning in the 1960s as a means of encouraging activists to take care of themselves to avoid burnout. It was community care, which I think is actually something you will hear a lot about this month in this series. However, as with many things in the United States, the term was later taken and redefined and popularized by mainstream media to mean something that seems very different than how it was used in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So self-care was a term that became really popularized in the mid-2000s. And what happened was it combined this idea of predominant white culture as defined by the media with the self-care ideology that was used by the Black Panthers, and it didn't really mix well. And so you have this white culture, grind culture, productivity-based model of living. You know, this idea of like, get it done at all costs. The American dream, work as hard as you can to achieve, you know, the goal of the white picket fence, the family with 2.5 kids and a dog or whatever, right? So we have this white culture ideal, this grind culture, trying to implement this self-care ideology of don't burn yourself out. And the two really didn't mix well. And so self-care kind of took on this nuance of pampering and massages and candles. And really what happened is we developed this avoidance strategy, or introduced this avoidance strategy that became self-care as known by the pampering and massages and candles and bubble baths, right? And so all of those things became what we in the mainstream media called self-care. And another thing that happened was part of this white culture, we have this idea that boundaries are bad, and boundaries are actually a primary part of self-care, defining boundaries for ourselves, right? And so the idea of self-care, and at least in the mid-2000s, was that self-care is selfish. How dare you take time away from caring for your family or working as hard as you can at your job or whatever the thing is. How dare you was kind of the vibe. How dare you take time for yourself? You are supposed to serve and serve and serve and give and give and give, because that's the culture, that's the ideal. And don't you question me how much I care about my family, because look how much I serve and serve and serve and give and give and give, right? So it was this idea of like, well, forget your own needs, forget your own issues or troubles, and just focus on others. That's the way of life that we're not questioning. And so self-care kind of took on this particularly appropriated image because it was being, I think, applied poorly. And self-care became this woo-woo thing. Self-care became a luxury. Self-care became pampering. And maybe not really what self-care is actually meant to be. So, is that really what it is? Is it woo-woo? Is it luxury? Is it pampering? Is that really what self-care is? And if it's not, then what is it? While you're here, remember to hit like, subscribe, maybe even drop a comment. We would love to hear from you, and thanks for watching.
So if self-care isn't the pampering image that we have been fed, what exactly is it? Now, I don't know about you. Let me back up a little bit. I don't know about you, but for me, I think we have reached like the breaking point. This idea of self-care as this luxury or this privilege or this thing that we do to escape from our life or to avoid whatever. Let me tell you, that idea of self-care is no longer sustainable. And I think that we are at the breaking point of this idea. Now, Dan talked a little bit about this productivity-based model, this give, 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 and serve, serve, serve. And if you're not exhausted, then you are not doing it right. Well, I'm here to say I think that it's about time that we move away from this idea. And you know what's really exciting? I think we actually are. We're moving away from this productivity and success-based focus and instead leaning into the benefits of self-care, this idea of finding meaning, this idea of finding fulfillment. And sometimes that's not being exhausted all the time. That's not saying yes all the time. That is actually sinking deep into the things that are values, the things that we hold dear, the things that are important to us, the things that serve who we are, the things that serve who we are in the world and how we want to show up in the world, and really beginning to focus our energy on that. You know, this also means boundaries. And we talk a lot about boundaries, and we've talked a lot about boundaries in past months. But I think boundaries, honestly, is one of the most crucial aspects of our current understanding, or our current continued evolution of this understanding of self-care. You know, Prentice Hemphill had an amazing quote and said that the boundaries are the distance that I can love myself and you at the same time. And so when we are able to take care of ourselves, we're able to understand what is ours to do within our sphere of energy and within our sphere of responsibility, then we can begin to say yes when we want to and say no when we want to. And when we do that, what happens is we become more compassionate, empathetic, and loving individuals. Because Brene Brown in her research found that the most well-bounded people were the most compassionate people. And it's because we could give of ourselves from a space of groundedness. We could give of ourselves, we could serve and love others from this space of boundaries and from this space of self-care. And so serving others doesn't mean we say yes all the time. Sometimes serving others means that we say no when we need to, when our own cup needs to be filled, or when our own physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy is low and needs to be rejuvenized. And so when we can say no, and when we can begin to take care of ourselves, then when we say yes, our yes is from that space of fullness. Our yes is from that space of energy. Our yes is from that space of self-care. And man, doesn't that give power to our yes? And so when we want to, focus on the needs of others and serve others and care for others, community care, individual care, caring for our families, it's important for us to focus on our own needs first. Just like, when you're on a plane and they tell you, if the oxygen mask falls down, which for me, this whole idea of breathing calmly is kind of a joke, but I digress. But putting it over your face first and then helping someone else. And I know that example is used a lot in self-care, but I think that it's like the most tangible understanding of kind of our current situation with self-care. This need to care for ourselves, this need to look at our own needs, our own things that we need in order to fill our soul, these own things that we need in order to take care of ourselves. And when we can do that, then it opens the door for us to be able to serve others in a very real way, and actually to serve the world in ways that we could never have thought possible if we had not enacted this truly sacred act of self-care.